Okay, so first in our Unit 3 slash end of the midterm things is early Christian art. So we'll start with late antiquity, the end of the Roman Empire, beginning of what's called the Christian era or the Middle Ages even. And again, you go through the slides as you want, but I'm going to go through some of the important artworks and stop at some of the important ideas that obviously affect art history. So obviously one of those big ideas that affects art history are these major movements of religion. So the big ones that kind of come up during the Roman Empire are Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Mithraism, and Gnosticism. Of course, of those big five, only three are kind of left, but they all kind of shared the same things. They all claimed that the only way to get to heaven was their version. The only truth was their truth. They all had either prophets or gods and or angels or divine beings speaking directly to people to tell them what to believe. They all offer hope for being saved if you believe their truth. They all have either a Messiah figure, someone who's going to save everybody, or a prophet who's telling everybody what God wants. They all believe there's a struggle between good and evil. They all actually, every one of those big faiths, practice some kind of ceremony with water to purify you. They all believe, of course, that you should also go out and tell everybody about this faith and seek new members and new converts. The only exception here again is, the only exception here is Judaism. Judaism doesn't seek conversion, and some versions of Judaism don't even allow for conversion. Only three of those five obviously made it to the modern world. I'm pretty sure that most people in the class and maybe in the country haven't heard of Mithraism or Gnosticism, but Christianity, Islam, and Judaism have made it all the way to the modern world. Mithraism almost became the Christianity, and you would have heard of Mithraism rather than Christianity, except for the battle. Basically, the guy who won, Constantine, later chose Christianity, versus if he had lost that battle, the Maxentius, the emperor, would have won, and he was a big Mithraic person, and he would have pushed Mithraism. And Gnosticism was a version of Christianity that basically was Christianity without the church, without any kind of having to go to church or involvement of a church. That made it till about the 1200s, and then it was wiped out basically by the popes and the Catholic Church, which basically had a series of crusades. And I know you're familiar with the crusades, I think, against the Muslims and reclaiming the Holy Land, but there were a lot of other crusades that had nothing to do with Islam, and one of those was to wipe out Gnosticism in France. So there was a crusade called against them. This one probably the most successful crusade because it did wipe out that version of Christianity. It has a modern rebirth in about the 1980s. There are Gnostics again, but it doesn't really have a direct lineage, so it can't really claim that it's been around for a long time because it's not the same, and nobody kind of knows what they were doing in the 1200s versus what they're doing today. So the only Christianity that can say it's been around for 2,000 years, like consistently for 2,000 years, is the Catholic Church. All the other versions of Christianity are either brand new, like last 200 years new, or died out really early and really quickly. So again, dates don't matter here, but these are the basic dates. These are the biblical dates, by the way. These are not historic dates. Based upon the way the Bible dates things, these are the dates. Nobody knows for sure if this is when these things really happened, and there's actually some contradictory evidence to most of it. The only thing that we get to when we get to like history matching up biblically is when you get to the bottom one here, when Israel is invaded and Judah is conquered by the Chaldeans. But that's it. And then you have the return of the Jews back to their homeland, the Hebrews back to the homeland. You have the birth of Christ. And I know this might be something, I guess, quickly to talk about. I know we celebrate the birth of Christ like as the year 1, but it's wrong, right? The real birth of Christ happens somewhere between the year 6 and 4 BC, which is pretty funny, right? Jesus was born 6 years before Jesus. But, that's just because somebody screwed up in the Middle Ages when they did the calendar and figured out the dates, basically. And when they finally figured out that they made that mistake, they actually had I'm going to say election's the wrong word, but they voted should we just fix the dates? And I'm going to make up a date now to make it easy. Say it's the year 1700 when they figured it out. So should we fix the dates and just make it 1705 next year? Or should we just leave it alone since people are so used to it and keep it as 1701 next year? And basically, the keep it as it is, we're already used to this. To add just 5 years to the calendar would confuse everybody. So it never was changed. So we're technically actually in if we're going to go by the birth of Christ, either 2024 or 2026. We're not really in 2020. So that's why these other dates have, like the crucifixion of Jesus is around the year 29, but also that could be wrong because of those 4 to 6 years that are missing. Not missing, that were wrong. They're not missing years. We know we're there. So you do have that pop up too. So all of our years are kind of off, which is kind of hard to kind of get used to. But if you don't know it, which most people don't, then it doesn't bother anybody. And if you're like, well, how do we know? How do we know? Because, again, using the Bible as our only source, because it is our only source about the life of Jesus. Jesus is born when King Herod is the king of Israel, right? And King Herod, the king of Israel, dies in 4 BC. That we know because we have the records. You can go visit his tomb. The Romans kept records of everything, and we know that King Herod died in 4 BC. And again, if we're going by the Bible and the biblical, what the Bible says is true. It says Jesus is born during King Herod's reign. Remember, King Herod is the one who the 3 wise men come to when Jesus is born, and he asks them, why are you here? And he says, they say, because the king of Israel is born. And Herod doesn't like it, but they're smart, hence they're wise men. So when King Herod asks them, well, where is he? They say, we'll tell you when we come back. And of course, they never come back and tell King Herod where Jesus was born, because they realize he's not a very good person, for lack of a better way to define that. And so if you remember your Bible, King Herod then orders all of the babies under 2 years, all of the male babies under 2 years old in Israel to be killed. And Jesus gets saved, of course, and John the Baptist as well gets saved, of course, but they get warned by the angels, and they get the heck out of Israel before King Herod kills everybody. So obviously King Herod can't kill all the babies when he's trying to kill Jesus 4 years after he's dead. So, the birth of Jesus has to be around 4 BC, and as early as 6 BC for that reason, in case you're wondering, like, where did they come up with these dates? There's a couple other things, obviously, that are incorrect. Obviously, the big thing that's also incorrect is the birthday of Jesus. It's not December 25th. It was never celebrated as December 25th. Early Christianity celebrated on April 6th. It moved to December 25th when the Romans basically took over. The Roman emperors took over Christianity, and since the Roman tradition of celebrating the winter solstice was a week-long festival where you had a tree in your house, and you put a wreath on your door, and you decorated your tree, and you gave each other gifts from December 21st to December 26th, and the 25th was the big day in the celebration. They basically took that celebration, and rather than getting rid of it and saying it's pagan, it's anti-Jesus, it's, this old pagan religion, they said, hey, let's just replace it and put Jesus' birthday on the 25th and make our lives easier. Now, like I said, the first 400 years of Christianity, nobody celebrated that day except for the Romans, but eventually the Romans completely dominated Christianity, and everyone started celebrating December 25th as the birth of Christ. Now, again, it's completely inaccurate for millions of reasons, but again, you can use the Bible for evidence, not to get the date, because you'll never get the day in the Bible. But if you remember, Jesus is put in a manger outdoors, middle of winter. No, of course not. And then when Jesus is put in the manger outdoors, right, who comes to visit him? Shepherds who are tending their flocks in the fields. Well, there are no flocks in the fields in the middle of December, right? It's too cold. There's no fields there, so it clearly could not have been in the middle of winter, just again, based on biblical evidence alone. So, how does this happen? Basically, the Romans take over the religion. Constantine the Great, as he's known, becomes the first Christian emperor because his mom is Christian and his sister are Christian, so for the first time it's okay to be Christian, and Constantine becomes Christian like 20 minutes before he dies. He gets baptized, so he's technically the first Christian emperor. But while he's an emperor, and because his mom and sister basically do a pilgrimage, there you go, and they travel through all of the spots where Jesus went. So they travel from Rome to Israel, or back then Palestine, and visit all the spots where Jesus visited, all the holy spots, and mark them out, or have people build churches or build chapels, or at least build something to memorialize that spot. Like Jesus walked here, Jesus had dinner here. The Last Supper, by the way, the dinner, the house where the Last Supper was, is marked. The church, well, it wasn't a church, they turned it into a church. The place where Jesus had the speech, blessed are the poor, blessed are the humble, right? There's a church there now. And all those things are marked out actually by Constantine's wife and his sister. So when they came back from that trip, they basically complained to their brother, who's the emperor, so he can do whatever hell he wants, right? That everywhere they went to church, the churches were a little different, and they were teaching different things about Jesus and different things about Christianity and different things about the faith, including different books that you could read and not read. So Constantine, basically from pressure with his mom and his sister, formed what's called the Council of Nicaea, where he had all of the priests, all of the bishops, all of the cardinals, the Pope, and every major figure in Christianity come to the city of Nicaea. The Romans basically paid for it. Put them in this big, gigantic palace, basically locked them in, fed them and stuff, don't get me wrong, he's not torturing them, and said, nobody can leave till you come up with one form of this faith. And so the Council of Nicaea basically establishes Christianity. Right, the Nicene Creed comes from that. For any of those of you who are religious, you might remember the Nicene Creed. Sometimes it's called the Apostles' Creed. It's the one that starts with, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, etc. That prayer comes from this meeting. And in that prayer, it lists what you're supposed to believe, basically. That's the point of that prayer, right? And so at that meeting, they throw out what books are no longer acceptable. They throw out what's going to be in the Bible and what's not going to be in the Bible. So I know that we're familiar with the Bible as 4 Gospels and 23 books. But at the Council of Nicaea, there were 52 Gospels and something like 180 some odd books. And so they cut a lot of them out. Obviously, a ton of Gospels, 48 of them cut out, and made them basically illegal and heresy to be caught with them. Fortunately, some people decided that was a good time to hide them rather than destroy them, and so in the 1940s they found a whole bunch of these. So if you're super interested in what early Christians were thinking that didn't make it into the official textbook, the official Bible, they are out there for those who are interested in reading. So unfortunately, a lot of stuff was lost still, though, so some of the books were lost. We'll never know what they said. But a lot of those 100 and some odd books, and all 48 of the missing Gospels have been found, including some interesting ones. Gospel of Mary Magdalene, Gospel of Judas, right? Judas, the guy who betrayed Jesus, and several other books that are fairly interesting and intriguing, including stories of Jesus when he was a kid, which you kind of miss in the New Testament, right? So Jesus is a little kid, then he's 12, and then he's 30, and you miss all the stuff that happened in between. But there are books in this that cover it. Now, a lot of them were cut out basically because they're like, nobody needs to know that, not because it's bad, not because it's, but some of them were cut out because, hey, we said Jesus is X, but here he is doing Y, so that book is completely gone because we don't want Jesus doing something like that, right? And so eventually, after Constantine, more and more people become Christian. Eventually you end up with Christian emperors. The big, huge, important one is Theodosius, who basically makes, instead of Christianity being okay to worship, he makes it the only thing that's okay to worship and makes everything else illegal. Once he does that, he does 2 things. One's obviously he makes all pagans bad and persecutions of the pagans start instead of persecutions of Christians, and tons of buildings are destroyed. But the other thing he does is, because Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire and the only religion of the Roman Empire, it starts a thing called the reliquary trade. And the reliquary trade is basically find something that Jesus touched, did, hung out with, a person he hung out with, one of the apostles, one of the disciples, right? Buildings they went to, places they went, clothing they wore, their bodies themselves, the entire bodies, etc. And those things became like ridiculously expensive, and everybody wanted some of it, right? And so tons and tons of selling of artifacts begins, which is basically the early beginning of capitalism. We don't generally look at it that way, but it is. The other religion, like I said, is Mithras and Mithraism. And Mithras has a very similar story to Jesus, and that also confuses a lot of people. Thank goodness, I don't want to say thank goodness, but, the other guy lost, so we don't really know much about Mithras, but we do know the story, which is he's born of a virgin. He believes everybody has good and evil. And there's a good God and a bad God. He was killed. He rose 3 days after the dead. He was born on December 25th. There's a lot of similarities between Mithras and Jesus. So unfortunately, most of the ancient synagogues didn't make it, but some of them did. You don't have a lot of ancient Jewish stuff, unfortunately. We do have some copies of the Bible going all the way back to the 1st century BC, so 100 BC. We do have some early paintings from synagogues. Here's one of those synagogues. This is the interior of Dura Europos, which is in Syria, which I do not think exists anymore. So this may be the last you see it, because when ISIS took over, they kind of destroyed a lot of stuff, and I think this is one of the things they destroyed, unfortunately. So it's all scenes from the Old Testament, because obviously if it's Jewish, it's only going to be concerned with the Old Testament, because they don't have a New Testament, right? And Jewish themes, right? So I'm not going to spend too much time. Okay, so Christian art starts out as basically just stuff inside of people's homes. So also in that Dura Europos place, right close down near the synagogue, is a Christian house, which there is this little baptistry place where you would baptize babies. And generally they were just in people's homes at first, so there weren't churches per se. It was a person's house. That person was kind of like a bishop, and would do all of the here's a better picture of the house. All of the religious ceremonies would be here, right, where they would meet and talk about Jesus. Again, unfortunately, most of the older stuff is really hard to see. Here's Jesus holding a sheep on his back, so Jesus as the good shepherd, right? Pretty famous thing. Jesus walking on the water, one of the miracles, right? Inside this house, they have all different miracles from Jesus's life. But the big thing to notice, I guess, when we're talking art, and again, I flew through what the art characteristics are, but basically whenever you get a religious culture, and this is important because I know it's on the test, whenever you get a religious culture, and it's on the midterm, I think, as well, whenever you get a religious culture, so whether it's the Sumerians or the Christians, artwork deteriorates. Now, it's not on purpose that it's a decay of art and they don't want to make good art. It's more of make art that has symbolic meaning. So it feels good. It looks awful most of the time because it's just done by whoever drew it. Like, it's not like by an artist. And in the Sumerian period and in the Christian period, and whenever you have a super religious period, artists don't matter, artists don't count, artists aren't, it's more of a collective society. We're all in this together. So no one becomes an expert at art, and basically anyone can do art. And because of that, art styles are decayed, right? They're bad. But the important thing of the artwork isn't if it's good or bad, it's that do you understand the message of it? The message becomes way more important than the skill. And then you get individualistic cultures, warrior cultures, where it does matter all of a sudden, right? All of a sudden it does matter if you are an individual and you are better than the other guy. And it does matter that it looks exactly like it should look, or looks really good, because you're kind of showing off your culture and your society and yourself at the same time, right? So those are the kind of two big differences. So you're kind of going to look at this and go, this art's not very good. I mean, the Greeks and the Romans were doing this amazing stuff. What happened? It's because it doesn't matter that it's good. It matters that you understand this is Jesus holding a sheep, tending to his flock, right? And these are people praying, right? And then these are different stories that you would or would not know. But if you didn't, that would be the priest's job in this area to tell you the stories of each one of those things. So you could tell the Bible stories by a little, kind of like an early version of PowerPoint, right? Again, Jesus as the Good Shepherd. So what you will notice, however, all of our earliest pictures of Jesus, hopefully you notice in this one especially, all of our earliest pictures of Jesus, he's got no beard, short hair, and he's wearing a Roman toga. Well, clearly, if the Romans are adopting the religion of Jesus, adopting Christianity, they don't want him to look like an ordinary Jewish person, because that would look weird to the Romans. Why would be worshiping a Jewish-looking person? Romans hated beards. Beards were looked at as a symbol of weakness and a symbol of, I'm going to say it, and a symbol of being a homosexual. Long hair and beards was a symbol of being gay in the Roman world, and the Romans, as we talked about last week, were really homophobic. As a matter of fact, in the New Testament, there's a warning about beware men with long hair and beards, right? Paul, the saint, writes that, and I forget which book. And you're like, well, wait a minute, Paul. All Jews had long hairs and beards. That means Jesus probably had long hair and a beard. But so Jesus is never portrayed that way at the beginning. You'll notice, this is a woman praying, you'll notice as we go through some of these other pictures of Jesus, he's basically a Roman soldier, a Roman citizen. Right? He gets a beard later, he does, right? But not at the beginning, right? And so this is Jesus on this thing here. This is Jesus on this throne here. I think I got a close-up. Maybe, okay, maybe not. Maybe you can't tell. But he's wearing a toga. Like, he looks like a Roman, right? There, I did have a close-up. So there you go. Jesus entering into the city of Jerusalem, right, beginning the Passover festival, and again, the beginning, the end of Jesus' life, where eventually he gets crucified this week. Jesus sitting on his throne with St. Peter and Paul, who can have beards because they were okay, because they were known to be Jews, right? But Jesus can't have one, even though he was also a Jew, right? It's really bizarre. Again, Jesus a statue as the Good Shepherd. Again, it's a very common theme, because if you remember the parable in the New Testament, there's one sheep that gets away, and it's really a bad person, right, that gets away, and Jesus focuses on his time trying to convince the bad person to be good, and all the other good people who stayed are like, why are you wasting your time with him? Let him go. And, and the parable is nobody doesn't count, right, basically. So Jesus sitting as a Roman emperor, basically, wearing Roman sandals, wearing a Roman toga, sitting on a Roman throne, right? Standard things we don't consider Jesus to be. But Jesus is usually introduced to cultures throughout history in a way to look like that culture. So when Jesus is first introduced in Asia, Jesus looks Asian. When he's first introduced in Africa, Jesus looks African. When he's first introduced to the Native Americans in America, he looks Native American. So the standard Roman building during Christianity are basilicas, which used to be just courthouses, and instead of a courthouse, which at the end there would be a judge, now at the end is where the priest is, and everybody sits and listens to the priest. And then on the side are usually places where you can pray, generally where there are statues, because again, in the Catholic version of the faith, statues and saints are very important, which again is the only version of Christianity, only one that exists at this time. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. It doesn't mean you don't need to do this. It just so again, this rounded apse area would be where the judge would have been anciently in a Roman building, but just turning into a church, it becomes where the priest is at the front of the church, at the head of the church. Obviously, there would be seats here. There aren't seats here on this particular day. I got lucky because they were cleaning, but generally there'd be seats here so people could sit and listen to the priest. And again, on the side, you can't really, well, you can see over here on this side on the left. You can see there's a little apsed area, and there is a statue, and there's a little place you can kneel and pray and offer up stuff. There are sometimes round churches still, because the Romans built round temples. When the Christians took over and the Roman Empire took over Christianity, they still made round churches. It's a little bit more difficult in a round church, clearly, because people have to sit around the priest. So the priest is in the center, but he's not really talking to people. So these generally weren't used for congregations. They were generally used for prayer meetings. And generally, if it's a circular church, 99 out of 100 times, someone really important is buried inside that church. For example, Santa Costanza, who you may or may not have heard of, I'm going to guess no, is the Emperor Constantine's sister. She's the one who basically helped Christianity become okay and legal in the Roman world, so obviously she's a really important saint. This is the ceiling. Again, there's Jesus, no beard. All these cool little mosaics. There's Jesus riding a chariot. Again, no beard, right? So he's almost always looking like a Greco-Roman god or a Greco-Roman citizen. He doesn't get till like the late 300s, early 400s does he get a beard, right? And that's basically because of interaction with the local people and realizing that Jews don't look like that. So this is what I meant when I said Jesus appears in a bunch of different ways. So this is Mary, and I know you didn't think so, Mary and baby Jesus, basically as Native Americans, Jesus in India, obviously he never was there, but to Jesus in Asia, in China in particular, by the way, and Jesus in Africa, and of course Jesus in Jamaica, because, you know, why wouldn't we have Jesus, the Jamaican version, right? So the second half of the Christian thing that I can finish is mosaics. I'm going to talk about mosaics a lot. Not a lot, but mosaics are tiny pieces of rock, sometimes tiny pieces of glass, sometimes tiny pieces of really expensive gemstones. Especially as we get to the Byzantine period, a lot of the backgrounds you'll see will no longer be colored. They'll be all gold. Gold is real gold, pieces of gold. So mosaics are putting these tiny pieces together to tell stories and or scenes from the Bible, as in this case it is. And this is what they start to decorate the sides and ceilings of churches with, eventually even floors. Some of those famous ones are, this is probably one of the most famous ones, the mausoleum of Galla Placida, who's a wife of an emperor, who was Christian, obviously. And it continues in the Roman tradition, at least at the beginning with Christianity, and that the buildings on the outside are plain, boring, just brick, right? But the inside gets basically ceilings covered with mosaics, floors covered in marble, and then here are the tombs where the family of that lady, Galla Placida, is, right? So if you bring in the close-ups of the mosaics, these are all mosaics, even though it kind of might look like a painting to you. Tiny little pieces put together. Where you see the gold color in these paintings, in these mosaics, that is gold. Those are pieces of gold. Same thing. These are pieces of gold. So now Jesus still being the good shepherd again, right? Now he's wearing a full-out Roman emperor toga. This, you can't really tell if this is a bad picture. That's purple, the kind of cloth folding over his shoulder. And that's a symbol of him being an emperor. Now he has a halo on his head, which originally, again, the original purpose of the halo was not, hey, this is somebody holy. It was, hey, this is somebody important, right? Later, it became the symbol of this is a saint, or this is Jesus, or this is someone important. But the original purpose of a halo is the important person in this picture, that's this guy, right? So I'll have another one for you, I hope. No, I don't, not until I get to Byzantine, but I'll show you the difference. But as you can see, everyone here has a halo. Everyone here has a halo because they're all important, because it's not necessarily because they're holy. So again, Jesus looking completely Roman, wearing purple. Now you can see the purple better here. So he's a Roman emperor, he's not just Roman, because the only people allowed to wear purple in the Roman imperial world were Roman emperors, the only people that could do that. So here are some of the other big thing in the Middle Ages is illuminated manuscripts, which are basically the Bible written out by hand and then pictures drawn in basically by bored monks originally. So again, the artwork isn't great, and it's not supposed to be great, but you're telling the story and you're understanding the story, and the story is related to kind of what you're reading above, right? So it's pretty cool. Same kind of thing. Here's the story of Jacob in the book of Genesis and what happens to Jacob in his life, and this is kind of a quick version of the story all happening at once. Here he is fighting the angel, right? And again, it would be written here. So these are illuminated manuscripts. So it's basically a book that has been illuminated by drawings, right? So here's some more. Sometimes there's more drawing than story. There's also a lot of ivory, and I think that should be the end of early Christianity. I think, yes, it is. And so we'll do the next thing, the next section, I think, which is Byzantium next.